kind of a busy news week going on in Saudi Arabia. You got and we'll get to a lot of it in yellow, which is why that segment of this podcast is so cool. We get a lot of people say that, sometimes we just skip ahead to yellow to get caught up because there's
that's cool.
Some weeks there's just so much going on. This is one of those weeks there's so much going on. You got the Crown Prince, in India for the G20, the announcement of a huge deal with the US. So we're going to get to some of that stuff in a little bit, but it's hard to say that this is the one big thing for Saudi Arabia this week, but it's my one big thing this week, and that is Saudi Aramco's venture arm, Wyatt Ventures, sort of the blue chip VC in Saudi Arabia. It's been around for a long time. Announced a raise or an investment, of $52 million in funding as the co-lead in a company called Mighty Buildings, which is a startup based in California that builds tech for prefabricated, environmentally friendly homes. And Wyatt co-invested with Bold Capital with participation by Khosla Ventures. Khosla Ventures is of course, the blue chip Sand Hill Road VC that participated in an earlier round. Seems to have the Midas touch when it comes to investing in new companies really at any stage. Other investors in Mighty Buildings include KB Badgers, a South Korean firm investing in from its sustainability focused fund. 20 investors in this round with Wyatt Ventures in the lead. I think this is important, and it's my one big thing because, and actually let me get to that in a second. So just a little bit about this company. Mighty Buildings is a 3D building construction technology company that makes prefab homes in a factory that are environmentally friendly and climate resilient. It uses what it calls its patented Loomis material, which the company says is 5 times stronger than concrete, and creates structures that can resist events like hurricanes and earthquakes. So that is really cool. Essentially what they're building is homes in a factory that are super strong and super resistant to climate change that can then be shipped places and assembled for cheaper that are better for the environment and everything else. So just really cool company. This was announced 2 days ago, and I started looking at this company because this is a space that's been around really since about 2017, 2018 is when you first started to hear about 3D printing houses. But prefab houses have been around for decades and decades. You used to be able to order a house out of a magazine essentially, and they would ship the products to you. A lot of those houses are standing still today. So this isn't a new concept, but what they're doing, and they have a lot of competition, which I'll get to in a second, but they're essentially building these really strong houses that you can then assemble very cheaply. And if you have the right place, if you're living in, for example, the Caribbean or Florida or Saudi Arabia, and you have like a lot of issues with climate change, this house can potentially be cooler, stand up to winds and sandstorms or hurricanes, anything else. So just a really cool company. So getting into it a little bit, really the challenge with any startup is identifying a problem that creates a large market. And that's almost always, if not always, the second page of any pitch deck. And if it isn't the second page of a pitch deck, that's a huge red flag. You need to have a huge problem. And for this company, Mighty Buildings, the problem is really there's so many that fold into one. Housing cost, durability of homes, sustainability of home materials, construction, everything really is just a cost thing. But these are all global problems. And when you have that in place, you typically look at the company and its solution to that problem by asking how unique is this solution? So you have the problem, that's good. You've got my attention, but how proprietary is the solution? How protectable is it with patents and licensing? If the answers to either of these questions are not very, then there has to be some other market advantage, like a major lead in the space or a lot of VC money, a lot of backing, really a head start in any way. So on this is sort of what got me interested. Beautiful website, everything else, a lot of money coming in from Wyatt, which is interesting because, they're Aramco's VC arm, but you have some other blue chip firms in there. The company claims its proprietary printed material, which is made of 60% recycled glass, is 5 times the strength of concrete, 70% the weight of concrete, and produces fewer carbon emissions during manufacturing. It's rated for winds up to 150 miles an hour, compliant with the California Building Code, which is quite strict, including Title 24 energy requirements and other reg standards. So they've kind of got a lot of things buttoned up with the company. It employs ultraviolet light to cure its material off-site. This allows for, quote, highly refined and, quote, unique shapes with a range of customization options. So Salmani architecture may now be part of that build out and part of their products on offer. So little bit all over the place here, but this is an interesting company. It's a really interesting play for Wyatt Ventures, which does a lot of stuff in energy and sustainability. They have a focus on Saudi Arabia and relevancy to Saudi Arabia. And that's, I guess, what you could call sort of the Lucien model from the PIF, where you invest in a car company. People drive cars all over the world. EVs are going to be a thing all over the world, but you have a little bit of a local interest. You want these things to be manufactured in Saudi Arabia. You want basically the company to be able to say, hey, like we are, and this again ties into another Yella segment we're doing as well, but ties into the EV metals market, and there's really a huge opportunity there. So there is absolutely interest in both from Wyatt Ventures and from this company, Mighty Buildings, in setting up a factory and starting to make the Middle East and especially Saudi Arabia a hub for what they're doing. So, prefab homes have been around for a while, but this does strike me as different. Scale is going to be an issue. They also have a lot of competition. Just among some, you have Icon, Perry 3D, Saib, Alquist 3D, Printed Farms, Nidus 3D. So there's a lot of people doing what they're doing. And actually remember when I was in Riyadh in June, there was one of those advertisements on BBC for a house, for a company I think the UAE invested in, that was doing this in the UAE and building one whole house in the UAE to kind of demonstrate the compatibility with the local environment and everything else. But this is a fascinating move from Wyatt, because if this company is then going to be setting up in Saudi Arabia, manufacturing in Saudi Arabia, supplying some of these massive new developments, especially in residential development from Roshan and some of these other mega developers in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia could actually be one of the biggest markets for this new company as it reaches scale. That's sort of, that's my one thing. I think it's super interesting that this space is very interesting, because globally people need places to live. It needs to be a lot cheaper to do that. And so, this could be a winner for Wyatt, I think.
Yeah. That's just, I feel like it's like an episode of Shark Tank. I feel like, I think I should offer you a residual or something.
What are your sales?
Mr. Wonderful.
Mr. Wonderful.
I'd like a residual. No, that was a good one. And I think as you point out, it's emblematic of what Saudi Arabia is trying to do in general. And why it is interesting, as you mentioned, is sort of the granddaddy. I mean, it was established in 2013, so obviously before Vision 2030. $500 million venture capital firm investing in high growth tech startups. It has invested in more than 60 startups. This is a $52 million raise, of which why it didn't take all of it. But so it's a little bit of money, but it's kind of cool. It's emblematic of what Saudi Arabia is doing. It's placing bets everywhere, and it has numerous vehicles to place these bets, Wyatt being one of them. And so, for example, the Crown Prince launched a $200 million fund to invest in domestic international high-tech companies just recently. And, it's going to be part of a new strategy that's going to be sort of headed by Kaust. In February at the LEAP conference, 9 billion investments in technology sector. So they're gauging their future, wondering what the fourth industrial revolution means to them, and then targeting specific technologies that further their homegrown economic priorities and growth priorities. And this is a really good example of it, because I think there's one of the largest 3D printers is in KSA. I've got to get more details on that. So, for example, I remember an article about building a house, a 3-story house with a 3D printer, but that would have been with traditional materials, probably concrete or whatever. Mm-hmm. This is a different deal, and I think a little more farther along the evolutionary line in terms of manufactured housing. But really interesting. And like I said, Saudi Arabia is placing its bets everywhere. and places a lot of bets, it places a lot of big bets, a lot of little bets, and some of them are going to tank horribly, and it hardly matters. You just have to have some percentage hit, and you've changed your world.
100%. And you have, I mean, the sort of unspoken benefit of doing that, exactly what you described, making these bets all over, because you want to have a local startup ecosystem. You want local entrepreneurship. It's hard to just generate that from nothing. We've kind of discussed that on the podcast in previous episodes. But what happens when you invest in these companies and then they set up a factory over here is spillover effect and tech transfer. I mean, you're going to start making these innovative 3D houses in Saudi Arabia, and then somebody that is working there saying, I got an idea on how to do a roof for this, or a special way to, I mean, with houses, it's, very complex. So this is an innovative piping material that can go into it, stuff like that. And then you have Saudi startups that essentially were germinated from this tech transfer. And that is a really good plan for Saudi Arabia. You can't force that to happen. It just happens. And one way to do that is just make these investments and have a way to have things kind of come over and say, well, this is a huge market. Take advantage of this. And then, you never know. You've got contribution to local content goals that Saudi Arabia wants to hit. This is one way, maybe the best way to do it. So this is just cool. And it's not the biggest thing happening in Saudi Arabia this week by a long shot, but it's something that grabbed me in for a few hours looking into this company and all the competition here, because the space could be massive. And if this is a winner, this is a massive market size. This is huge. So anyway, cool. Yeah, just a really cool company. Good luck to them. They've been around for a while. So let's see what they do next in Saudi Arabia, but we should be hearing more from them soon.